So hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Ponieman. I'm a journalist and a writer. I write for Benzinga, Forbes, and I've been covering the psychedelic space for a while. And sitting here next to me is Mr. Neil Woods, who's a former detective sergeant and undercover operative, who's chairman of LEAP Europe and also chairman of LEAP UK. Or both, okay. And he's also a board member in LEAP USA. And for those who don't know, LEAP is an international organization that gathers police and former police members who are advocating for evidence-based drug policy. And Neil is also a best-selling author with his memoir, Good Cop, Bad War, which basically covers your 27 years working as an undercover police officer, right, in London? Or okay, 14 years. Okay, so you've been a policeman for 27 years, is that right? Okay. Sorry, this is not a math class. So, Neil, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what experiences brought you to the psychedelic space?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose I'm here really to emphasise the need for psychedelic therapy for police officers. And that creates quite an interesting reaction in some people. It makes them step back and really think about it. But that's an important part of this, because demanding access to psychedelic therapy for police will disrupt the thinking of the general public. And as an activist, because I am that's how I identify. I'm a full-time activist. As an activist, that's very appealing to me indeed. So I'll just explain a little bit about the need. So people don't necessarily understand just how traumatized many police officers are, but you'll probably be aware that there is a crisis in policing. You could hardly have missed that, with various poor behaviour of police in the UK. Well, they're rioting about it in France at the moment. And of course, with the Black Lives Matter movement, there couldn't be more evidence of a crisis in policing. But we would argue from our organisation's point of view that you cannot solve the crisis in policing without first solving the mental health crisis in policing. I'll give you... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, in your experience, what traumatic experiences or how does the trauma work for police members? Because a lot of maybe people who are not in the force don't really understand how that process works.
Well, there's various ways. Many of my colleagues have CPTSD, which can be like the death of 1,000 cuts. You get so many traumatized incidents, you experienced so much secondary trauma. There's all sorts of multi-layered harm which comes to the brains of cops. But in my case, I think one of the earliest traumatized experiences, well, in fact, the first 2 times I thought I was going to die, the first 2 times, was on the same day. I'd gone to buy heroin from a heroin dealer. I'd been buying weights of heroin for some considerable time. And I thought he was friends. I thought we were friends. And he opened the door and he put a samurai sword to my throat. And I remember the feel of the cold steel on my neck and really thinking, well, this is it. I've pushed my luck too far. I'm going to die. And he was screaming at me. He was shouting at me, "You're fucking drug squad. You're drug squad. I know you are." And then he suddenly stopped, and this woman looked out from behind him and started laughing. She said, "I thought he was going to say he was then." And she was joking. They were both joking. He was just winding me up, or he was just reminding me who was boss. Or maybe he just wanted to try out his new sword. I don't know. But it was a pretty intense and scary moment. He sold me 4 bags of heroin. And as I was walking away from the address, I was putting these bags of heroin in a cigarette packet. And I look up, and there's a knife pointing to my stomach. Someone's trying to rob me for the heroin that I've just bought. So talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire. So I just saw the knife. I thought, I've got to get away. I'm not letting go of this heroin. I've already gone through too much for it. And I started running backwards really quickly, and I managed to get away from him. And I'll never forget the thing he said to me as I was running away. He says, no, just come here a minute. Like, no. So that was the first 2 times I was going to die. But I mean, I'm diagnosed with PTSD, and I've been through 3 psychiatrists, multiple psychiatric nurses, therapists. Oh, it goes on. So I understand my illness quite well, but so I have quite complicated PTSD from various events, but I also have moral injury because I caused significant harm to vulnerable people when I was working, and that is a very significant part of my mental health. And when I have had suicidal ideation, it's been because of that profound sense of guilt. So it's complicated, but it's complicated for lots of my former colleagues as well. So if we can deal with, or we can teach police leaders or inspire police leaders to demand psychedelic therapy for their troops, then we will be going a long way to tackling the mental health crisis in policing.
Yeah, and there's a large amount of police members and former police members that are struggling with PTSD. Do you have any numbers or statistics?
Yeah, there's a study in the UK which suggests that 1 in 5 serving police officers have suffering from some form of PTSD. The same study suggests that 50% of police officers are have some kind of precursor problem, hypervigilance, some indications that they're going down that route. So this is a really significant problem. There's another study in the USA which suggests there it's 1 in 4 officers. Now, the environment when you do become mentally ill in the police is horrendous. I was treated as the enemy when I became mentally ill. You're treated with great suspicion. What have you done wrong? So we've got a lot of educating to do with police. But what would you like me to tell? Would you like me to tell you what we're going to do?
Maybe before
am I jumping ahead of your questions?
Yeah.
I am. I'm so sorry.
Before we get into the really meaty part, can you maybe talk about sort of the current crisis in policing? The loss of public confidence, which I don't know if it's something of these days or it's. I mean, was there ever like a golden age of policing where people weren't really losing confidence as right now, or is there a problem right now?
There is a very significant crisis at the moment within policing, but what that has led to is a significant political crisis. Because if you speak to any politician in any nation, they will understand better than the general public that when the public lose confidence in the police, this is a serious political problem, very, very serious. I mean, you look at the riots that's happening in France at the moment, this is what can happen when the public lose confidence in police. I hate to be the voice of doom, but right now in the UK, the conditions are perfect for riots here. We have a cost of living crisis, and we have a significant loss in public confidence in policing. So this is a very political issue. So if, from this forum and far from our strategizing, if we can tackle or offer political solutions to the policing crisis, then we're also moving along the conversation in political forums.
And how does the mental health crisis in police lead to a loss of public confidence or the crisis in policing in general?
Well, I mean, public confidence in policing has generally been on a downturn for a very long time. But most recently, of course, in the UK, we've had high-level misogyny, sexual violence, murders. Also, for a very long time, there's been very clear evidence of systematic racism within policing. You're 9 times more likely to be stop searched for drugs in the UK if you're black than if you're white. I mean, that's a horrific statistic. And there are many more indicators of of those systematic problems. That's one example of many things which is eroding public confidence in policing. And the crisis in France, as I've already alluded to twice, that's another indication. I mean, in different countries, that loss of public confidence has a slightly different flavour, slightly different, but it leads to the same thing. And it means that whatever nation you're in, the solutions are much the same.
Awesome. So we're just at a workshop in the back room, and someone asked an interesting question, which is, how is getting access for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in police helping like the whole environment for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy? Is it because it's like a good press headline to have a policeman asking for this treatment, or how is this your grain of salt in the whole matter?
Well, it works on multiple levels by focusing on police as the issue. I mean, many of the same arguments apply to emergency services in a broader sense. In America, there's been great, in the United States, there's been great political momentum because of the need highlighted for veterans for psychedelic treatments. That has shifted the political narrative really rapidly and really in unusual ways, in that it's been right across the political spectrum. So you've got really very autocratic and right-wing politicians demanding access to psychedelic treatments for veterans. We're not quite so Starship Troopers in Europe. We don't quite venerate our veterans in the same way. Now, I completely support the brilliant work by Heroic Hearts, and what they say and do is very important. However, I believe that political momentum, that kind of political momentum, will not be brought by demanding access for veterans, but for demanding access for police and other emergency services. Because in Europe, that's where our sympathies are more traditional, and that's where the more conservative sympathies lie.
Perfect. Very well put. So maybe now we can jump at the actions that you're doing with LEAP and how are you working into expanding access for police?
So at LEAP Europe, we have a plan. I mean, we are constantly working with the media, with public-facing events, trying to grow the social movement for change, not just for psychedelics, but for all drug policy. We advocate for an evidence-based drug policy for all of the policy issues. But at the moment, we're working hard on political advocacy for psychedelic therapy, and we have good access to political connections all across Europe. But what we're going to do next March is we're going to have, if we get sufficient support, of course, we are going to hold a side event at the United Nations Committee on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna. Now, we've done this for a few years. We have the ECOSOC status to do that, which means we have the right and the access to take part in that forum. But we are going to have a panel of police officers all demanding access to psychedelic therapy. And we will have all the drug ministers there and the drug commissioners, but we will be putting the work in ahead of that date to make sure that we also have journalists there. Now, in 2019, we held an event there, and we got ITV News from the UK to do a headline coverage of what we did. So we know we can do this. We know we've got access to the news producers and news editors. But this is actually a much more dramatic statement than we did in 2019. It's much more dramatic. It's much more interesting. It's much more of a page-turning narrative that the cops are demanding drugs. Because it opens up all sorts of debates, doesn't it? It's really disruptive to thinking, and that's what we want to do. We want to provoke the debate. We want to disrupt the general thinking. We want to provoke and disrupt the political thinking, because that's where we believe we can really move things forward in terms of developing the policies that we need.
Great. And is there a specific pathway that you're seeing for getting access to police, like specific clinical trials that only members of the police can be inscribed in, or is this just like advocating for the general access for PTSD and then just having members of the police get it?
We're activists, so really we're going to be doing this in very broad brushstroke terms. We demand access. And what the conversations that come from that, well, we'll adapt. We will adapt to the opportunities that come. Because we will be having different conversations with, if we can get access to the Swedish delegation, which we will try, we will be having far different conversations to those in Sweden, if we get access, well, we will get access to the commissioners from the Czech Republic or France, or Norway, or Finland, where we have allies, Denmark especially, we have good allies. We have different conversations, but having the opportunity and saying these things in very broad brushstroke terms, it creates opportunities. It shakes it up, and that's what we need to do. So if anyone has any ideas or wants to be involved in the policy discussions that this will create, then please get in touch with us at LEAP Europe or OEV Partners.
Great. How is your organization funded?
We're mostly volunteers. We are made up of police and other law enforcement who come to the same conclusions as I have. I resigned from the police I mean, I was having a mental health crisis as well, but I resigned from the police so that I could do something about this, because I realised I was only causing harm as a police officer, and there are many people like me around the world. So we're mostly volunteers. We get some seed funding from the OSF, so we need more help.
Great. And, you know, as I said, having your voice be part of this industry is an opportunity for the industry and for the for-profit side. So I guess donating to your organization is not just altruistic, it's also a little bit of a self-interest if there are companies that want to do it. Can you talk a little bit more about your colleagues, you know, histories from their side, that you can think of people that are needing this treatment?
Yes, certainly. I mean, my colleagues in LEAP in France have been having extraordinary media access in the last 18 months, because some of our members have done a book, and one of those is from a guy called Fabien Bilheron. I never pronounce the name. I'm never very good at French. Sorry to any French people. And he basically has publicly said that his work in the drug squad in Paris made him suicidal. Again, the same kind of things as I've had, the moral injury, becoming acutely aware that you're actually causing harm to people. This is not good for one's mental health. And he became suicidal. And he's become a really high-profile figure, because he's done all of the news channels, all of the news interviews, he's done documentaries. And this has created a real momentum in France for this discussion about what we do about the mental health crisis. And, of course, the fact that this mental health crisis is being caused by drug prohibition in its broadest sense. This is the war on drugs that's causing harm to my colleagues. Every single one of our membership who has a mental health problem, and a good friend of mine, he can't go out of the house. He has a dog to stop him, to nudge him if he disassociates with his PTSD. He can't leave the house. Him, myself, all of my colleagues that have had mental health damage, has all been because of the war on drugs.
And what is the pathway to getting more awareness in the police force for demanding, you know, these types of medicine? And how have you been successful so far in that respect?
Well, spreading the word within police, I mean, that's our job, that's our daily job, really. Networking, speaking to police officers everywhere. But it comes down to, you know, sensible, intelligent PR. It comes down to focused strategizing and doing the events, actually meeting the politicians. And I think the real milestone for us in the next few years is going to be at that event next March, because it's not just going to be one moment in time. It's going to be the beginning of many conversations, and it will be something that we will be able to refer back to for years afterwards.
Amazing. Well, we're running out of time, but any last words? Anything that you feel like you want to communicate?
No, just thank you very much for inviting me. An activist in a forum like this, it's exciting. But I want to see a world where this business succeeds dramatically. And I hope that we can find a way of helping you do that.
Amazing. Great to have you doing the good work.